Hello, I'm Ben Craker, President with the Ag Data Coalition, and today I'm going to do a little talk about evaluating digital tools on how to compare some different technologies, how to make sure you're getting value from them, and also, what's needed to use the different tools effectively. So to start off with, I wanted to define a little bit on what digital tools are and why there's more questions about how you see a return on the investment with a digital tool versus what I'd call more of a hardware system. So on the pictures here, you can see a GPS steering system or section control. That's kind of what I'm including in the hardware, where it's pretty immediate and you can see tangible results. So when the section control turns on and off, it's pretty obviously you're saving seed, fertilizer, whatever input you're putting down. Same thing with guidance. It's pretty easy to see in the field while you're doing something that you're having reduced overlap, reduced skips. You don't have to pay attention as hard. Whereas with a lot of the digital tools, the results can be harder to identify, or it's going to take a little while before you see the results. And the ROI can be less clear as a result of that, where, if you had increased yield at the end of the season, was it because you did variable rate, or was it the weather, or was it a different seed variety you tried? It's a little bit harder to directly attribute why there was an increase if there was. The other big difference with digital tools is generally they require some pre-planning, whereas with a guidance system or section control, once you get the system set up and calibrated on your machine, there's not a whole lot of routine setup that you'd have to do for each field, where with digital tools, a lot of the times you're going to have to do a little bit of pre-planning. Creating a variable rate prescription map isn't something that magically happens when you pull into a field. That's going to require some data and other inputs into it to make it work out. So the key to kind of any digital tool on having ROI is having a data plan. I'm not talking about on your cell phone here. This is more how you're going to manage, store, analyze, share, use all the data that you're looking at. So first off, you want to have that organized and have a backup. You don't want to rely on the terminal and the tractor to save everything. If you update software on that and everything gets wiped out, you're at a loss then. So that's where it's important to have kind of a plan on where you're going to keep all the data, knowing who has access to it, who's it's shared with. Just having a handle on what data you have is going to be pretty important. We'll go through a little bit more here in a couple slides on why that matters. And there's a United Soybean Board and has a pretty good YouTube video series that's under the Ohio State Precision Ag YouTube library. I got a little link to it there that kind of goes through the pillars of data management on some of the things you want to do, the basic fundamentals to be able to use any digital tool. You're going to want to follow along some of the things they show there on, like I said, making sure things are calibrated, keeping the original files, having file names that you know what is actually in that file. Another important thing is reference data. So actually labeling what seed variety you used can be a big benefit when you're looking at yield maps. The other thing is to be upfront with data service providers. So if you have the co-op coming out to apply fertilizer, who gets the as applied map, or is there anything special that needs to be done to get that? And basically just being intentional and having a plan about it, because Ag Gateway has a pretty good little animation here I'm borrowing on how all this data flow works. So when you break that down, we've got the kind of three areas of data collection where you're collecting data in the field about the operation from the machines, as well as the historical archive. You've got all that information that we talked about as data collection tools. And then data use, generating a crop plan or that work order recommendation generally. You've got some sort of tool there that's going to analyze all that data you collected to make that plan. So considerations when you're looking at these data collection tools is really know what you want to learn. What decision are you trying to make? You want to analyze how well your machines are performing, how much time you're idling, how much time you're spending at headland turns, how much time in transport. You probably want to put something on the machine that's going to track all that stuff. So that's a good first step when you're looking at a new technology, is knowing what you're trying to figure out and understanding what information might be helpful in figuring that out. Another part of that is what resolution of data is needed. You need to see what's happening on every square inch of the field. Is a 90-foot boom going to be accurate enough? And it's not just spatial resolution, it's also temporal or over time. So Do you want to be notified once a week what the weather was in the field if you're putting a sensor out there, or do you want to have hourly updates coming in? How frequently do you want to capture those data points? Because depending on what you're trying to do, it will make a little bit difference on how frequently you want to be collecting that data. And then some other points here really get back to having a plan on knowing how and where data will be used, what systems it's going into, how's it going to be collected, stored, transferred, and understanding the level of effort there. Is it going to automatically wirelessly update to a cloud? Is somebody going to have to run out to a device and plug in a USB stick and get information off of it every few days? Just having a good handle on what it's going to take to actually get data back to where you can do something with it. And along with that is understanding, if it is going to a cloud system, are there any restrictions on pulling the data out to put into a different system? That really gets back to reading the end user license agreement for these tools to understand what the data sharing looks like within a system. So you understand who they're sharing it with, when, why, how. And another big thing is the format. Most of the time, a lot of tools can handle different data formats, but you want to make sure that the data coming out of your collection tool is going to be compatible with the tool you're going to use to analyze it. So on the other side of the data use tools, things you'd want to think about is, again, what are you trying to improve? Do you want to have better yields, just overall profitability on a field, regardless of yield? So maybe controlling input costs. Again, are you looking to meet some sustainability metrics? Are you trying to, again, monitor your equipment fleet, reduce irrigation costs? Really have a question in mind that you want to answer, and then that'll help you, decide which tool you want to look at. And then the big thing with these tools is to understand what that system needs to make it work. Getting back to what resolution is needed, both over time and in different areas of the field. How micro manage it? Are you going to be able to do that at the field level? Are you doing per row? A lot of times the limitation is the applicating machine. If it's a 90-foot boom and that's where you're controlling rate from, that's really the resolution that you're able to get down to. Whereas if you're doing individual rows on a planner, you can get a much higher resolution that you're controlling to. So that's where you got to understand what it's going to take to make that happen. Looking at a lot of different tools out there, if they're going to make a recommendation on nitrogen use, they're probably looking for 3 to 5 years of yield history, some soil sample information, things like that. So review the material, ask questions about the tool on what the minimum is to make the system actually work. That should be pretty easy to figure out talking to the different people involved with a system. And that kind of leads into, will you be using the tool yourself, or is it an advisor service provider that's actually using it? Because that'll change a little bit on maybe who has to collect what data or what information is available. And again, how is that data going to be stored, transferred, archived? Do you get to get a copy of it? As well as with derivative products is something that's often thrown out with this is, okay, you gave them your yield history, your fertility information as planted data. They use that to make a derivative product, which is a variable rate nitrogen application map. Who owns that map? More than likely, you get to get a copy of the actual map on how to go apply that, but they're probably going to keep their secret sauce on how they created that map. So just knowing up front who has access to what at the end of the process is important. So like I said, kind of going down to maybe a few more specific examples here on what's required for efficient or effective use of these different tools. Like I said, variable rate maps, you always want to have the original files off of a machine. Once they get loaded into a software program, a lot of times they'll clean the data is the term for that, where they remove any points that don't look right or don't make sense. And everybody does that a little bit differently. So if you're going to use a new tool in the future, you still want to have that original file around, because you don't know generally if it got modified if you're trying to export it out of a different software tool. Well, like I said, you'll likely need 3 to 5 years of yield history, soil sample, soil type information, any historical as applied fertility records. Did you put manure down in the fall or anything like that? That's going to probably be the minimum to get a real good variable rate map made. You can do it with less information, but like I said, it really kind of depends on what you're trying to manage and what level of accuracy you want to have into that. Similar with Machine performance, you want to have a good handle on all your input costs, fuel, labor, repair costs, purchase, depreciation, your diesel exhaust fluid on modern tractors, a lot of different things that go into that. And then if you can get that broke down to really see how well your machine's performing in work, transport, idle, headlands, everything is a little bit different depending on where a machine is in those different phases of an operation. So you can really kind of pinpoint where maybe the bottleneck is. Is somebody just need a little bit more training on how to turn at the headlands so they're a little bit more efficient in the field, something like that. Kind of the big thing people really look for is, that field level profitability, or even at the sub level of a field, so different management zones. That's going to take a little bit more planning and foresight to keep track of things. You're obviously going to want your as applied information, where seed, fertilizer, and everything goes, but you're going to want to have some of the other reference data on what actual variety went in there. If you just hit one in the planter monitor because that was quick and easy, so you get planting, that makes it a little bit harder on the back end to figure out what actually got planted there. Similar with fertilizer, pesticides, if you're not including that information in the task file on the machine, that can be trickier to figure out. Then going along with the machine use, again, you want to keep track of how many hours different machines are in there, all the different consumables that are going through machines, how much do you have in transport, labor, did you hire anybody to do any custom work? So you got to do a really good job and, like I said, kind of have a plan for how you're going to collect all this data, because there's a lot of different inputs that go into it. You've got your overall overheads, your cost for land, any improvements, if you're putting tile in, anything like that, then obviously collecting yield, and your other input costs, so storage for the crop, everything that rolls into that is important if you want to get that true view of your overall profitability at a field or at a subfield level. Like I said, with most of the tools out there, you're able to collect data at a resolution where that'll be able to be possible. And another thing to keep in mind with a lot of this stuff, if you are trying out new practices and new tools, is to do test strips or control areas. You probably don't want to go all in with the whole farm on a new tool. Maybe pick a field, maybe pick part of a field where you're going to try the new practice or new tool out, and have a part of the field that you do it the way you were doing it. So that way you can kind of benchmark. That's one of the big things, I think, to help with proving the ROI of some of these tools, is to have that area of the field that is the same as you would normally do it in the area of the field where you use the new tool. That way you have a way to kind of really evaluate if it actually made a difference, or if it was the weather or something else that actually drove that change. And a lot of the universities I know have different tools available to help set up these test plots and how to lay those out. So it's a good resource to look for there. So kind of in summary, the digital tools can really help inform different decisions, especially with the data collection tools, to improve overall operation efficiency and profitability. Generally, the data analysis tools are going to take a little more planning and setup to make them work. So that's where you got to know what you want to do and have a plan on how you're going to do it, to really understand what your goals are and what it's going to take to achieve them. If there's going to be a lot of running around with USB sticks trying to track down data, and that's just not something you want to do, you're never going to be successful using that tool. So that's where you want to go in up front, following those data management best practices on knowing what you have, having it organized and backed up. That will be a big help in actually being able to implement and use one of the tools. And obviously keeping that data sharing, storage, control in mind. Where's your data going to end up? Who's going to have access to it? Make sure nothing's going to happen to it that you're not going to like at the end. And part of that is just having to read through some of those end user agreements and knowing what's going to happen with different tools. And finally, like I said, have that plan and ask questions. Make sure that the tool you're looking at is going to be able to do what you think it does, and knowing up front what the requirements of different systems are for the data inputs, to make sure that you have that information available to successfully use the tool. So with that, I hope that helps give a little bit more insight in how to evaluate and think about some of these different digital tools. Hope it helps your operation be more successful in the future.